Armed police have carried out a dramatic raid of a pizza takeaway in Newcastle in the ongoing search for missing Abdul Ezedi. No arrests were made and Ezedi remains at large, and this is a week on from the chemical attack in Clapham, South London, that has left a mother of two seriously injured, still sedated in hospital. Friends have described the victim as a devoted mother who just wanted a safe home for her two girls. Joining me in the studio now, TalkTV correspondent Holly Hudson. Hi, Holly. We're also joined by former Met Police Detective Peter Bleksley. Good to have you both here. Holly, you set the scene for us and tell us what's happened in this terrible story, and then we'll talk to Peter about how somebody can possibly go missing in the city with the most surveillance cameras in the world.
Well, yes, this morning we've seen a number of raids now, haven't we, in the manhunt for Abdul Ezedi, the latest of which, as you say, was this morning in Newcastle. Warrants issued 2 properties, one of which was a takeaway. It's believed that he may have worked at around 18 months ago. Armed police, counter-terrorism police swooping in on those addresses, but no arrests have been made, we're told by police. Inquiries continue. So we're now over a week on into this search, which is now becoming a bit of a desperate search for Abdul Ezedi, and it seems that police are no closer to catching him. He is evading capture, it would seem, and of course that is leading to increasing pressure, not just on the police now, but also on the Home Office, because there's serious questions, big questions being asked about how Ezedi was granted permission to stay in the country despite having been convicted of a serious crime. And TalkTV's learned, Vanessa, that he won his appeal to stay in Britain after the Home Office failed to send a lawyer to an immigration tribunal to challenge it, because we understand Ezedi, who's believed is from Afghanistan, was reported to have come into the UK in the back of a lorry in 2016. He was turned down twice by the Home Office for asylum before successfully appealing, and a judge granted him permission to stay after hearing that he converted to Christianity. And it's at that tribunal, at that appeal, that the Home Office failed to send a lawyer to lodge any objection.
So now, to establish what that means there was nobody there to argue against it. He had his lawyer saying let him stay, and a letter from the priest saying he's converted to Christianity and seen the light. He should definitely stay in this country, because if he were to go back to Afghanistan as a Christian, he'd be shot on sight at the airport or whatever it was. But nobody to put the opposite view, nobody to put the opposing view at all, because there was no lawyer sent by the Home Office. That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yes, and he'd obviously had convictions for sexual assault and exposure in 2018. He'd been sentenced to 2 consecutive suspended jail terms of less than 12 months, but was allowed to remain because his crimes weren't considered serious enough to meet the threshold for deportation. So, as I say, this is, of course, raising huge questions for the Home Office and leading to criticism of the wider asylum system as well, in particular in relation to foreign offenders, because TalkTV has also learned that there are over 11,000 foreign offenders that are subject to deportation action that are still in the community at this moment in time out on the streets. Now, I'll just tell you what the Home Office said to that. They insist that foreign national offenders have no right to be in the UK, and that over 16,000 have been removed since January 2019. But this attack and the ongoing search, of course, all heaping pressure on the Home Office, ultimately the Prime Minister here, and whether there are missed opportunities, whether he could and should have been stopped before he was able to carry out this horrifying attack.
I mean, this whether there were missed opportunities, Peter, is almost a moot point, isn't it? He was refused asylum twice, he commits an offence, and yet he's granted asylum in the absence of any lawyers from the Home Office. It's quite a remarkable story, isn't it?
Well, at least one culprit has been identified, the Home Office, but sadly, Ezedi remains at large.
Yeah.
Almost embarrassingly so for the Met Police, because in the last 8 days, we've heard some very bullish language from Commander Saville. We've got a large team of top detectives. We've got the best possible resources, and these kind of phrases being trailed. But the bottom line is he's still out there. There is, of course, a distinct possibility that he's dead.
Well, that he might have taken his own life, possibly, you mean?
Yeah, and that's largely out of the fact that the latest CCTV images that we saw, and we must remind viewers and listeners that those CCTV images are 8 days old now. We haven't had any recent CCTV of him, and that begs the question, why not? But in those images, he travels across Westminster Bridge and then across Vauxhall Bridge. They're very close to one another in central London.
Yes.
And of course, he walks along the embankment either side of those bridges. So perhaps was he contemplating going into the Thames, for example? And it's highly unlikely that anybody would survive going into the Thames this time of year, or any time of the year, come to that.
Yeah.
So that is, of course, one possibility that the police have alluded to. But the other one is he being fed, clothed, watered, housed, funded by a person or a network of people that really don't want him to be found. If that is the case, then it would appear at the moment they are more than one step ahead of the Metropolitan Police.
How difficult would it be to keep somebody concealed? Nobody to know they're there. Obviously, you've got to get food into them. You'd imagine, in his case, you'd need some kind of medical supplies because we saw that his face was almost half melted from that alkaline substance. I mean, do you think that when this manhunt is so well publicised, if you lived anywhere near a vicinity where somebody was being secreted and tried to be kept, you know, below the radar, people would eventually twig? They think, what are they doing there? What's that they're taking in? They don't usually do that. Who's that face at the window or something or other?
The bottom line is we have almost monocultures existing in certain parts of our great city where people from the outside don't visit, don't go in and out, don't travel through. So if somebody, for example, was being held in a property that was completely off the police's radar and that they weren't able to identify either by the examining of his phone or the searches that we know they've carried out, including the two in the northeast today, seizing devices, examining laptops, phones, whatever that may be, if he were being held in an address that simply was not on the police's radar and he had everything that he needed, which I strongly believe would include some kind of medical treatment, then the bottom line is he could be housed there until such time as perhaps he needed spiriting away to another address or even another country. And we must remember, there are fugitives that do successfully evade capture and sometimes leave the country. That is a harsh reality of day-to-day criminality.
Yes, yes. But let me ask you this. You know, you've just said something and you've said it in a very calm, factual way. There are certain pockets in certain cities that are, if you want to use the word, ghettos, they're no-go zones for police. And you said that in those kind of pockets, those isolated parts of the country, they're no-go zones for police. But I think people listening and watching will be thinking, how can the police allow that to be the case? How can there be parts of the city that you're meant to be policing that you don't visit, that you don't go to, where all kinds of nefarious activities could take place and you wouldn't know because you never enter?
The police, largely and foolishly, and courageous officers will admit to this, have abandoned the streets, surrendered the streets to criminals. They do not patrol anymore. You do not see that image, that welcome, much yearned for image of a police officer perambulating down the street, saying hello, engaging with the community, coming back to the police station after 8 hours of largely not arresting anybody, but being awash with tea and awash with information. That simply doesn't exist anymore. The police have become in many ways a social service, similar to what the AA and the RAC are for motoring. If a car breaks down, you call a motoring organisation. Now, if society breaks down, you call the police. And they spend the overwhelming majority of their time, the uniformed cops, going from call to call to call to call and not engaging and creating links within communities.
Was that a deliberate policy or was that happened insidiously and subtly without people really realising it?
Senior officers will tell you that some years ago they had to dismantle neighbourhood teams because of two factors. Number one, counter-terrorism policing had an increased demand. And of course, they will trail austerity still, some 14 years after those policies were imposed upon them. That wears a little thin. There is a realisation of the folly of their ways, but in terms of patrolling the streets and re-engaging with communities, in many, many parts of not just London, but further afield, those opportunities are lost. They're gone. And I fear that those kind of links within communities that could get somebody to whisper in a copper's ear where Mr. Ezedi is might never be recovered.
All right, and what about how literal you're being when you say there are no-go areas for police in this country? There are ghettos that are impenetrable, that police don't enter. They don't know who's there. They don't know how many children are meant to be at that house. They don't know whether that child's going to school. They don't know whether there's somebody stealing and taking all the fence goods into that place over there because they never go there. They don't go there. Why don't they go there? Are they scared to go there or what's going on?
Because community policing was sacrificed for other priorities, more important pressing matters, as senior police officers saw it. So once those teams are taken away and once those community links break down, it's very, very difficult to try and re-engage with people and build them up, particularly if we're talking about areas where people have a different culture, where they follow a different faith, where they might not have the culture and faith of the police officer that's trying to engage with them. And of course, the Met in particular have tried to be more representative of London by the faith, the sexuality, the colours of people that they employ, but they've been lamentably slow in that. And of course, only this week, the Black Police Association said, do not join the Met. That's the Metropolitan Police's own Black Police Association.
What was their reason for saying that?
Don't join.
Why did they say that?
Because of the discontent that they feel with the Met in terms of people being unfairly targeted for disciplinary proceedings and other forms of discrimination that they are alleging that Black and Asian and other minority police officers suffer within that organisation.
So what should the police be doing now? What should they be doing? And at what point would somebody reach some kind of conclusion that Abdul Ezedi isn't alive anymore? He either ended up in the river or he ended up somewhere else.
Well, rivers, streams, oceans, seas, they're often very slow to give up their secrets.
Yeah.
So if Ezedi did go in the Thames, it might be some time before that particular body floats, if ever. In terms of the operation, they will clearly have us believe that their best resources are deployed to it. It's an incredibly high-profile case. We're talking about it at the very start of your show.
Yes.
There is increased media pressure brought to bear on the police. They'll keep going and they'll keep deploying these resources until something else becomes more pressing.
Let me just take you back to something you've said that really does send, and I'm not saying this theatrically, I really mean it, a shiver down my spine. I'm sure Holly feels the same. I'm sure everybody watching and listening feels exactly the same. The idea, because you said it so bluntly and so vividly, the police have abandoned the streets to criminals. What does that mean? Because we hear of lawlessness, we hear of, so many crimes going unpunished, and so many people think it's not even worth telling the police. So what's happened? Do you think we already have a lawless society, or do you think we're heading for one, or what stage have we reached in all of this?
We have an increasing lawless society. Of course, I spend most of my time in my home city of London, but I do travel further afield. Every day I witness lawlessness, whether it be fare evasion. That's very frequently I see that when I'm travelling on overground and on the underground and the such like. And I am forever on a daily basis being told tales of people that are either victims of crime themselves or they know someone who has been a victim of crime, often very serious crime. And when I say to them, did you report that to police? Very often the retort is, what's the point? I then, of course, insist that they do report it to the police, because if they don't, there's an even less accurate picture of just how bad the criminality and the general decline in our society is.
Well, thank you very much indeed.